just in case it's needed. So welcome everybody. We have 45 minutes here today, so not a whole lot of time. I'm Danny Moss. I'm a staff officer with professional development at the association, and I'm so pleased that you're here. We're here today to talk about the sessions called Truths and Myths in Educational Practices. I hope it's a lot more fun than that title sounds like. The goal here is several goals actually. So we'll start off by taking a look at some of the sort of educational myths that are out there, just kind of as a fun thing to get us started. It's kind of amazing how many things are out there that kind of guide our practice and our planning and teaching that may or may not be true. But and the goal of that isn't really to make anybody feel bad, but just to say that to follow that up with, scientists have uncovered exactly how humans learn, and it's super empowering. And can really bring a lot of success for our members at a time when we all really need it, and ultimately for our students. And so we're going to learn some stuff, we're going to do some stuff, and then I'll leave you with some stuff. Okay, well, there's a few new workshops I'd like to start offering throughout the province. So if you're a local PD committee, if you are a convention, if you're a specialist council, if you want to bring this into your school, awesome. I'll also leave you with lots of great books to add to your summer reading lists or websites to visit, free resources, that kind of stuff. Okay. All right, so let's get started. So newsflash, teaching is really hard. It is super complex. We work really hard to teach students concepts and skills every day. Sometimes our students get really overwhelmed as they learn those new things. Oftentimes we teach students things that they do understand in the moment, but then they forget them by the time they come back, or they need to bring those things to mind again. And add to all that, all the educational fads and division initiatives and trends and things, which also can kind of guide our practice, not to mention all the other complexities that our kids bring with them. But there is hope. There is a lot of hope out there. In fact, there are some really great strategies that have been proven to work, that are highly effective, really easy to implement. You know, when I started teaching, there were some really complex ideas that were being kind of brought into the classroom, whole language at the time. Yes, I'm as old as dirt. But anyhow, it felt like for some of these teaching practices, you had to be really, really, really skilled at this, because if you just didn't do it quite right, it wouldn't work. The great news about some of the practices I'm going to share with you today is what all the scientists are saying is more is better. Anything is better than nothing. So if you just want to kind of dabble a little bit with some of these things, it's not going to hurt. You can't screw this up. These strategies we'll talk about today are transferable, any subject, any age level, ability level of our students. And ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be super empowering for teachers. It's going to give teachers, our members, our colleagues, success. And who doesn't want that, right? Sounds like a tall order, so let's get started. So, you know, I'm going to start you off with a fun little kind of mind activity. Our brain is such a fascinating, meaning-making machine. And does anybody remember the Yanny or Laurel? You heard this audio clip, and is it saying Yanny? Is it saying Laurel? Some people heard Yanny, some people heard Laurel. So, how about this one? Anybody seen the Brainstorm versus Green Needle? This one is super interesting because even when you know it's coming, it still will kind of get you. So I'm going to play you, just kind of get our minds going here and just have a little bit of fun. I'm going to play a little video clip, and then you're going to hear a sound. And depending on which word you're looking at, it'll say that particular word. So if you're looking at the word brainstorm, it'll say, you'll hear brainstorm. And if you're looking at green needle, it'll say green needle. Even if you know it's coming, it still happens. So here we go. Come on, YouTube. So did it work? Even when you know it's coming, right? Interesting, fascinating. And so the point is the mind is just this awesome meaning. It's just wired to make sense of the world. So let's start off. We're not going to spend a tremendous amount of time really focusing on the learning myths or things that aren't true about learning, but it's just the point of this is it's mostly to have a little bit of fun with it. If you believe in any of these things, like I have before I started really learning about these things, there were several of these things I thought were truths. And it doesn't mean you're a bad teacher at all. In fact, they've even done research on that. If a teacher is, adopting some of these learning myths, does it make them a bad teacher? And the answer is no. But it's just very interesting. And what it can do is it can really kind of change how when you hold certain beliefs about learning, it can really affect how you plan and teach, right? Makes sense. So anyways, let's just dive in for some fun here. One of the biggest ones that's out there, and it's still out there, even in our learning institutions for our pre-service programs, learning styles, the idea that people have a particular style of learning in which they perform best. I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner, I'm a kinesthetic learner. There's never really been any scientific evidence to prove this. And yet it's still something that we hold on to. And if you believe in the learning styles theory, then it really will change how you offer your instruction, okay? Left brain, right brain. This one was coming in even back when I was starting teaching in the early 90s. And essentially this myth holds that the left side of the brain is the more analytical, the logical side, whereas the right side of the brain was the more creative. In fact, anybody remember brain gym? Anybody been around for the brain gym days? Where you did physical activities that would sort of connect the left and the right side of your brain. It was like touch your right hand to your left elbow and various other things. Now we know that there are certain parts of the brain that hold certain functions like language, motor functions, but the reality is there's really no evidence that the brain is this dualistic and that you need to somehow try to connect those hemispheres with one another. All right. Next one, you ready for this one? This one might hurt a little bit. The learning pyramid. We've seen this around in lots of our stuff where it shows the effectiveness of various teaching methods. You'll learn about 10% of what you read, you learn 90% of what you teach others and various things. This was created by a guy named Edgar Dale in the 50s, before cognitive science had really taken hold. In fact, he's even stepped away from this. He's even kind of disavowed any real truth to the learning pyramid and has said that that really wasn't meant to be taken literally. There's really no evidence of this, okay? Now, the next one is really going to hurt because it hurt me when I first learned about this one, Bloom's taxonomy. So essentially, Bloom's taxonomy was never really intended to show that we should be striving for a higher order, or that the lower ends, those knowledge or remembering levels, were any lesser outcomes. It was actually created as a theory of assessment, such that it was sort of the idea is that as you move up the order, it was really unnecessary to assess any lower levels. In other words, for example, if an activity involved comprehension, knowledge was an obvious requirement, and therefore you didn't have to. So what I've heard some other people refer to this taxonomy as, instead of higher order, here's some people referring to it as an essential order. So in order to have that evaluation level, these other things must be present as well. So if it can accept that, then it really does place things like knowledge at a different level, because it's really kind of changed a lot of how we think about the activities we're doing with students. Should we vary our activities? Should we get kids thinking? Absolutely. But yeah, very interesting that the Bloom's taxonomy is never really been proven by science. Here's another one. I don't think this will surprise anybody. The idea that people can multitask. It's a myth. There is no multitasking. There's only task switching. And so I'm just going to show you a short video clip by a guy named Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath, a bright young guy. I'll share with you a couple of his books later on. He's got a great YouTube channel. Fantastic. And this basically is going to just, we'll do a little activity here, just to kind of keep us going and about multitasking, okay?
What if I told you that effective multitasking is an illusion? Don't believe me? Let's do a little experiment. For this game, you're going to need a pen and a piece of paper. When I give the word, I want you to write down the first 12 letters of the alphabet, so A through L. Then, I want you to write down the first 12 numbers, so 1 through 12. Now, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to do this. Are you ready? You can begin in 3, 2, 1, start.
Anybody trying this out?
All right. That game was supposed to represent unit tasking. In this case, you had two different tasks, write down letters and write down numbers, and you did each individually. And if you're like most people, you probably finished or got pretty far along that process. Now I want us to play that game again, except this time I'm going to change one small thing. Instead of first writing 12 letters and then writing 12 numbers, what I want you to do is alternate between writing letters and numbers. So in this case, you'll first write the letter A, then the number 1, then the letter B, then the number 2, and so on. As before, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to see how far along this process you can get. Are you ready? You can begin in 3, 2, 1, start. So how'd you do that time? If you're like most people, you probably only got to the 6th or 7th letter number combination. But why was that so much trickier than the first game? Well, unlike before when you were unitasking, this time you were multitasking.
Anyways, we're going to move on from that one, but yeah, I don't know if anybody tried that one out. Very interesting stuff. Anyhow, there's been a false dichotomy that is kind of pitted on the one side, understanding and competency development, and seeing memory work, rote memorization, regurgitation, kind of seeing as polar opposite things. We don't want to do that, we want to do this instead. And really the reality is that's not at all how learning works. We're going to hit that in just a little bit. But the point of all of these particular myths that we've talked about, and there's some others, like, it's kind of scary. The 10% of our brain, by the way, does anybody know in that last video clip, anybody pick out where that countdown timer, bonus points if you can name the game show where the timer comes from? But the point is, these types of beliefs, any beliefs we hold as educators, can really affect our practice. And it affects how we plan and how we teach. So there is hope. So what is real? I mean, the good news is there really is hope, and lots of it. There are practices that have been proven to be effective. They're easy to implement, as I said, transferable to any age, grade, ability level, and in the end, really super empowering to all of us. All right, so let's dive in. And this kind of comes to us from the world of cognitive science. It referred to also as cognitive psychology or the science of learning. Just kind of use those terms interchangeably. All right. So we'll take a look at a little bit of this, then I'll show you some new workshops that we'll be offering in this area, as well as lots of resources. Okay, so let's just hit a few of the foundations. Anybody remember this word from their university training? Schema, right? Essentially it's an idea, or it's a framework for that idea or a concept. And that the more you learn about something or that idea, your knowledge grows. And this can be knowledge, conceptual knowledge, but it can also be procedural knowledge, such as skills. Okay, it can also be facts, information. It's all knowledge. So as we learn things, we can then use that knowledge in competency work, such as critical thinking, problem solving, creative activities. And then in the absence of that knowledge, that competency work becomes much more limited. Let's try this out. I know Jackie Sky could probably get this one. She's in the house here right now, but she probably did work with both of these things. So if we were to do an activity right now where you were asked to compare the current teaching quality standard to the 1997 version, which changes do you feel were most significant? Well, a lot of us would have real trouble with that because we wouldn't necessarily be able to bring to mind we might not know much about the 97 version. And the 2019 version, we understand it, we get it, but in terms of having to really bring all those competencies to mind, we might get all of them. We might only get a few of those. Okay. And so it doesn't mean that we're bad critical thinkers or that we can't be creative, we can't solve problems. It just means we don't yet have all that knowledge to bring to mind. Okay, so knowledge really is important. And Roland Case, who is from the Critical Thinking Consortia out of BC, he's got a quote, you can't think critically about something you know little about. So it really places the whole idea of building knowledge and understanding at a really different level, if you can accept that. So let's talk about working memory a little bit. So working memory, it's what we're using right now. It's our conscious mind, things we're paying attention to, we're processing them, we're making sense of it. Okay. In some cases, we're building new schema for new knowledge that we're learning. In other cases, we're connecting it to things we already know. Okay, we're remembering, oh yeah, that's like this, or this, it's this, I remember this, this makes me think of that in my long-term memory. All right. So our working memory, it's quite limited. We're going to do a little thought activity here in a second. We can only hold, they say about 4, 5, some say a range of 4 to 7 things in that working memory, different things at any one time. And that's about 10 to 15 seconds. That's our working memory. Okay, unless we do something with it, it can just escape. Okay, so think of your working memory like a container with limited resources, like a cup or a box. All right. So one example of our working memory is when you're listening to a story being told and you're kind of actively processing the story elements in real time. Maybe at the same time, you're remembering and sequencing earlier parts of that story. Another example is when we're making sense of new information that's coming in and we're connecting it to things we already remember, knowledge we already have. Okay. And the amount of working memory that is being used is your cognitive load. Okay, and I'm not assuming that you haven't heard of any of these things, you don't know these things, but I just want to bring us all on the same page here, because it really does. If you can adopt some of these beliefs or understanding, it can really affect how we teach and learn, really maximize the impact we have with our students. All right, so we're going to do a little cognitive load experiment here. Okay, you ready, everybody? I'm going to list off some random letters that I'd like you to try to hang on to as many of these letters as possible. Okay, you ready? Here we go. Hang on to as many of these. Don't write them down. Okay, please. Just hang on to as many as you can. Ready? Here we go. Y, R, O, M, E, M. All right, what is 23 times 8? All right, do these things with follow me here, okay? Do this with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What are the last 5 letters of the alphabet, starting with Z? Okay, by the way, I borrowed some of those other tasks from a TED Talk, a really cool TED Talk I saw. All right, how many of these can you remember? Think about that. You don't have to list it. Of course, Gonzalez can do math in his head. He is such a smart guy, especially when it comes to numbers. But all right, so how many of those letters can you remember? What were you trying to do to bring them to mind? How, as you were processing them, think about what you were trying to do to keep them in your mind. Okay, what were you trying to do to keep them in your mind? Does anybody want to share? Go ahead and unmute. Anybody? Keep repeating them, says Susan.
Chunk them.
All right, repeating them. All right. Did anybody hit that cognitive overload? Okay, so with the cognitive load, that load can kind of become overloaded. Did anything make it difficult?
Yes, you continued adding more tasks. And
Yeah.
I was trying to visualize what you were saying, get a visual picture in my mind.
And then brought in those other math things. Thank you for that. Picture, anybody notice Captain Jack Sparrow enter the picture for a little bit there as well? So there were some distractions as well. So not only was I bringing in new elements, but then I brought in a distraction as well. So how do we learn? Well, essentially it goes like this. This is a graphic by a guy named Oliver Caviglioli. And it's Daniel Willingham's simple memory model. And essentially it's this, we take in things from our environment, okay, not all of them, we just kind of focus on certain things, we process that in our working memory, right in the middle there. And in some cases we build new schema, in other cases we kind of attach it to schema or ideas, our background knowledge that we already have. And from there, it goes into our long-term memory. Now that long-term memory is unlimited as far as we know, which is really quite exciting. But from there, we immediately start to forget that information unless we actively process it in some way. Okay, so that's essentially what happens. We'll come back to those ideas in a little bit. Come back to those letters in a little bit as well. All right, let's talk a little bit about dual coding theory. And essentially, it's this. As far as the stimulus from our environment, we can encode, and so you hear that word as well, encode, into our brain. Our brain encodes in two different ways at the same time. One is visually, so you can see this graphic on the screen. You can take in a lot of different elements at once. Okay. At the same time, we have this auditory track. Okay, it's a linear, it's sequential. As I'm talking or as you're reading words, it's being recorded there. And we can record those things, we can encode those things at the same time. And while we can just listen to words or read words, and we can just see images as a way of learning, when the research shows that when you combine those two, and that's no surprise to any teacher, right? Visuals and words together is more powerful than when just using one or the other. And there's a lot more really fascinating work that Oliver Caviglioli has done on this, and it's part of the dual coding workshop as well. Like, what does that mean in terms of how we organize learning materials? Fascinating stuff. All right, so let's go back to that letter remembering activity. I'm going to do this again, but this time I'm going to give you a little assistance. As I read the letter, I'm also going to give you a visual. Okay, well, let's see how many you can hang on to. You ready? Here we go. Y, R, O, M, E, M. What's the seventh letter of the alphabet? What's 30% of 8? All right, how many of those letters do you still have in your working memory? Okay. Was it easier to remember? Maybe yes, maybe not. Might also help the fact that you've now repeated these a few times, okay? All right, okay, we're going to try this one more time. And I want to make another point here related to cognitive load. Remember, we said there's about 4 to 7 things you can remember at one time. Okay, here we go. M, E, M, O, R, Y. That's right. Val guessed it. It is, yeah, it's the word memory backwards. But essentially, the point is this. If we were to do this activity over again, when you see that word memory, that is now one thing instead of 6 distinct things to remember. It's now That is one thing that your brain understands. You probably have a schema in your mind for what the word memory means. You probably have a visual recollection of reading, being able to read the word memory instantly. Okay. So it just makes it that much easier. So when we're talking about balancing that cognitive load and utilizing our kind of limited working memory resources that we have, having some of that background knowledge or being able to chunk things together can really make a difference. And there's a lot of fascinating strategies that we can use to really manage that load and also to reduce some of that extraneous load, they call it, or distractions. All right, well, thanks very much for playing along with that one. So I want to just hit, before we talk about some of the workshops being offered, I want to just hit a couple more research practices. The first one is retrieval practice. Now, this is something that has been, think about you trying to recall those letters over and over again in your mind, just saying them to yourself again and again. What they found is the act of trying to recall something helps you learn it more deeply, okay? Helps you understand it, the idea, and it helps you remember it, okay? So it's a very active process. Remember, we talk about using that memory actively. Really helps. Otherwise, that it just leaves. All right. Now, this retrieval practice works with all sorts of information. It works with concepts. It works with things like skills, different skill work, and it works with ideas, information. Okay. So lots of different things. So gone is the conversation about rote memorization and regurgitation. It really isn't about that, because retrieval practice works just as effectively with big ideas, complex ideas. As you try to recall them, it helps solidify that learning, okay? And scientists have pointed out this, this notion of desirable difficulties. The challenge is your brain struggles with that active processing. That is what makes the learning more durable. And that is why things like learning strategies such as rereading stuff, highlighting, okay, note-taking, rereading a chapter as a study method, these are all much less effective. They feel good, it feels easy, okay, but it's much less effective as a learning method. And that's why challenging your brain, those desirable difficulties, make that learning more durable and deeper. All right. Lots of ways you can do this retrieval practice. Self-quizzing, talking to a person, trying to recall ideas with a partner, jotting down key ideas, trying to remember them. Now, one of the really awesome outcomes of doing, like, for example, if you were to do quizzing on a regular basis with your students, one of the really awesome things that they've discovered is it actually lowers test anxiety when it comes to real exams. So that is a really nice sort of outcome of using retrieval practice. It can really lower that test anxiety. Now, again, this is not an assessment strategy. This is the learning strategy. So when you're doing quizzing or recall activities with students, this isn't necessarily about you as the teacher getting that information in a formative assessment fashion or summative assessment fashion. You can, if you want to check in on it, but the point is just the act of quizzing, the act of challenging oneself to recall is in and of itself an effective learning strategy. So you can make those quizzes, those retrieval practice activities, make them low stakes for very few marks or no stakes. You don't even have to look at it all the time with your to be an effective strategy for your students. And there are a whole lot more. I wish we had a whole half day or a full day to go into this. And there are a lot more evidence-based learning strategies as well. And I've got one workshop where we uncover all 7 of these different, and you recognize retrieval practice off the list, you recognize dual coding as well. And some you might make sense, the concrete examples, for example, but there are several different practices that cognitive science has uncovered that are super effective, really super easy to implement as well. So this has been a little snapshot of kind of that human cognitive process and how we learn. And so one of the biggest challenges we face is how best to utilize that working memory. Second challenge is sort of to fully understand and make sense of those concepts and skills that we learn as we build that knowledge. Okay, that knowledge, remember, that knowledge you're building helps us use that knowledge in competency development. And then the third challenge we have is trying to ensure that the important stuff that we've learned is not quickly forgotten. So it can be brought back to mind as we solve problems, as we think critically, as we work creatively, and more. So we're developing a few workshops as a starting point. And I'm really hoping that there is interest in this, and that we can perhaps we can form a community, or we can build on this and even get more workshops in development. And essentially the commonalities amongst these workshops is that we would touch a little bit on the theory, but also really leave people with real practical strategies that they can implement in their teaching right away. Now, this is not to reduce the complexity or to say that teaching is now a simple recipe. It's not all what's intended. We know that there are many challenges out of our control and many complexities in our classroom, many factors. But by adopting some of these specific strategies, it can really help increase our impact and ultimately the success of our students. So they'll be offered in, I'm thinking 75 to 90-minute workshops. But if you are interested in more, if you want to have a half day or a full day or a 2-day, workshop or something, we can mix and match and combine 2, 3, or all 4 of these workshops. So here's a few of them. One deals with the working memory and cognitive load, and really talking about how we can manage that as teachers best for our students. Because retrieval practice has been found to be, even though there were several that I listed, retrieval practice has just been found. It's about 100 years of research from cognitive science about the proof of retrieval practice being an effective learning strategy. And so I want to focus a full workshop on this and offer numerous different strategies that you can implement. You can plan for these, or you can just throw them in into your teaching at any point in time, and so it can be very, very easy to do. As I mentioned, I listed off a whole list where we can cover several different effective learning strategies. And then that dual coding, and how can we design learning resources that not only maximize learning, but also how can we fix some learning materials we have that might be getting in the way of that dual coding in some way. Okay. Here's an example of that. For example, if you have a lot of words on your screen and you're talking at the same time, it's almost like 2 auditory tracks. Now, I mentioned to you that you have an auditory and a visual. Those can work at the same time. 2 auditory tracks don't work nearly as effectively. We're back to attention switching, okay? Not multitasking, task switching, right? So those are the few workshops. So I want to leave you as well with, let's see how much time we have. 11 minutes left. There's loads of great resources and speakers, and I've got a short URL to share with you for these presentation slides, which includes links to their books and their websites. There's a lot of free resources out there in addition to books, but there are also some speakers. So this was one that kind of got me going on this in the whole area of cognitive science, and it was a book called Powerful Teaching. I don't know if anybody has this book. We have it in our ATA library. It's a fabulous book, and it focuses on 4 of these teaching strategies that we've talked about, including retrieval practice. And there's a great website, retrievalpractice.org, and the authors, Pooja Agarwal, she is a cognitive scientist, and Patrice Bain is a classroom teacher. So we don't always see, it's kind of shocking to me how we haven't seen some of this research always entering into our classrooms. And why is that? Well, the world of cognitive science and education, K-12 education, don't always communicate as much as we'd like. So that's why I like books like this, where you actually have a practicing classroom teacher involved who's actually tried this out and has worked with this research, okay? So there's some, again, retrievalpractice.org is loads and loads of free stuff on there, free resources. But the book Powerful Teaching is fabulous. This one I've seen a lot of Alberta educators have already, Understanding How We Learn by, there's a few authors there. And remember that Oliver Caviglioli guy I told you about, who was kind of a real lead in the dual coding? These guys all know each other and they all agree with each other. And he's done a lot of the illustrations in a lot of these other books. And he's done a lot of illustrations to help people learn the content in this book. So there's Dr. Yana Weinstein, Megan Sumeraki, there's some really great people. And if for those of you who want to follow up and potentially look at bringing in some of these speakers, and when I share the short URL for the slides, you'll see in the slide notes, I've given the names of all these people in case you want to follow up. Kate Jones is, she's originally from the UK. She's a teacher in the United Arab Emirates, and she's written a whole series of books on retrieval practice. And two of them are out, the pink one and the purple one, lots of practical classroom strategies. She also has a blog called lovetoteach87.com. That's, you can find her on Twitter as well. She's quite active on Twitter. But some great practical, lots of free templates as well, and activity structures that teachers can use in their classroom. You may remember this guy from the multitasking video, Dr. Jared Cooney-Horvath. I like Jared as well because he is a cognitive scientist, but he has also been a K-12 teacher. And he's written a couple of books, and one that I have is called Stop Talking, Start Influencing, 12 Messages from Brain Science. And he's got an awesome YouTube channel as well, where he's got loads of great short videos, kind of like the multitasking one you saw. So he is fabulous, and he's a really good presenter as well. You saw Oliver before and the whole notion of dual coding. He's got a great book, and his website, olliecav.com, is chock full of a lot of free resources. So that's also a really good one. This guy, Tom Sherrington, has a really great blog, a fabulous blog. He's another guy from the UK. There seems to be a lot going on in the UK with cognitive science in education, K-12 education. And he's got a blog called Teacherhead. So teacherhead.com, and he's written some awesome books. He's taken some learning principles from Barack Rosenshine and put them in a really easy to read, really short, 40-page, easy to read book. And has created a really cool series of books called Teacher Walkthroughs. And basically he works with Oliver Caviglioli, you guessed it, in putting in the illustrations. And it walks teachers through dozens and dozens of proven effective classroom teaching strategies, questioning strategies, practicing strategies, planning strategies, and walks people through step by step. Okay. So Tom Sherrington is he's a good presenter as well. Daisy Christodoulou, that's a mouthful to say, but she's a brilliant, also from the UK. She's written a book. She's written The 7 Myths in Education a few years ago, has written a very provocative book about assessment called Making Good Progress. And it's even questioning some things we've learned about assessment for learning. And she proposes a new way that aligns with cognitive science about assessment. So she's a presenter as well. And there's, you can find a lot of their free presentations as well, if you want to kind of see the quality of the presentations. Teachers versus Tech is a very intriguing one, especially for me. I've been involved with educational technology for over 15 years. And it's really challenging our current use of technology and really trying to align with some of these research proven teaching practices. Finally, yes, I know this Oliver Lovell looks like he's 16. I think most people do when you're my age, but he's a brilliant guy, and he's taken the cognitive load theory from Sweller, and he's put it in a very short, easy to read kind of guide that makes sense. And he's got ollielovell.com is his website. He's got a really fabulous podcast. If you love podcasts, where he introduces educational research called the Educational Research Reading Room. It's a fantastic podcast, and there's links in the show as well, or in the slides about his podcast show. So those are a few presenters and some of their resources. And if you'd like to get access to any of those materials, you can visit the short URL at the bottom, bit.ly/truths-and-myths. You can also use that QR code on the slide, and that'll lead you to a copy of the PowerPoint that I've put in a Google Drive. If you'd like to follow up on any of the things that you've seen here today, but also in particular, the list of books and speakers. So thank you. I know it's difficult in these short 45-minute sessions. I hope that I've given you some things to think about. Your brain may hurt a little bit. I know that there may be some cognitive dissonance going on with some things that you may or may not have agreed with in terms of some of the learning myths I've presented. Some you may agree with, some you may not, and that's okay too. But I hope I've given you some things to think about here today. And really the message here is one of hope. Just as Dr. Swanson mentioned at the end of the keynote last night, it really is a message of hope. There are things we can do to empower our fellow members to have greater success. And that's what every teacher I've ever met has wanted. So thank you so much for your time today. And again, this session will be recorded. And if anybody is interested in getting started with this, if you'd like to bring me into your school, to your local, whatever, I'd love to explore this more with your teachers. And if you have any suggestions on things, I'd like to also do some a video series, or maybe we could explore an online community of some sort for some ongoing learning. So thanks very much, everyone. I wish you a wonderful remainder of your day. And for those of you who are in Zone A, I'll see you at 1:30 for that. I think we're returning at 1 o'clock. Is that right, Chris? Is it 1 o'clock we're returning?
12:45 is the
Pardon me.
provincial update from Dr. Swanson. So we've got a 45-minute lunch break starting right away here.
All right. So make that 47 minutes for you guys. So you guys have an awesome remainder of your day, and thanks so much for coming.